Hello. Okay, back to my channel. Welcome back to the channel. So today, as you see on this video titled, this video is going to be titled as why African Americans should stop supporting Joe Biden. Mostly the reason why they support Joe Biden is because he was Obama's VP. Yeah. But you know the real reason why Obama picked him? Because he was good with white voters. Yeah, the Caucasian voters. Very popular when it comes to this. So here I'm going to expose his basically record that really affects cultural issues and every issue. His bills when it comes to his bankruptcy bill, his crime bills, all him working with segregationists. Kamala Harris even pointed it out, but she only talked about his stance on busing, but couldn't even do other things. She didn't expel. I'm criticizing Kamala Harris on the debate. She could have gotten more percentage points took more Buttigieg's voters if he attacked Buttigieg on, what was it? His support when it comes to black people. Yeah. And basically his stand. So, Joe Biden worked with huge, famous Dixiecrat segregationist Strom Thurmond. I addressed this on my video on things I forgot to put on the exposed video, reason why Corbin lost. Yeah, that he worked with Strom Thurmond, who basically his policies were about segregation. So he said, "You wouldn't believe what TYT put this. You wouldn't believe what Joe Biden pushed Reagan to do." So here we go.
We have to join together to ensure that drug dealers are punished swiftly, surely, and severely. In line with what the president is calling for, we have to hold every drug user accountable.
That's Joe Biden when he was a senator, and he actually was to the right of Ronald Reagan when it came to the drug war. In fact, he pushed Reagan as much as he possibly could to implement the drug war. This is something that most people are actually not so aware of because the criticism toward Biden is usually aimed at the crime bill. But when it comes to the war on drugs, if you look at the details and you look at what he was pushing for, he was certainly going for right-wing policy that had severe ramifications throughout the country.
And
Now,
there's lots of other
Biden
things.
says, look, the crime bill, that was federal legislation. The majority of the prison population is on the state level or the municipal level. So don't criticize me for that. I mean, just take a look at what these states are doing. But in reality, Biden fought aggressively to take federal funding and distribute it to the states so they could basically implement tough on crime policies that he was in favor of. So according to a great piece in The Intercept, it was written by David Stein. You should read the whole piece. David Stein writes, it was Biden who was among the principal and earliest movers of the policy agenda that would become the war on drugs and mass incarceration, and he did so in the face of initial reluctance from none other than President Ronald Reagan. Reagan even vetoed a signature piece of Biden legislation, which he drafted with Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina to create a federal drug czar.
So let's pause there for a couple notes here. If you notice in the first clip we played, Biden didn't talk about going after just drug dealers. He talked about going after drug users. And he said we have to get tough on them. When you read the whole history of Joe Biden's zealotry on the war on drugs, it's a little revolting. And I have to confess that I forgot
Courtesy to
some
TYT
of it.
and the Intercept.
Now, I know he worked with Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond ran on a segregationist ticket as a presidential candidate for that. So now people say that was a long time ago that Strom Thurmond did that. Then he then became a Republican again. No, I remember Strom Thurmond, and he was deeply racist. He was always racist. He never changed his mind. And so the fact that he was no longer a segregationist party person Republican Party person, it doesn't matter at all. So when Reagan was too liberal for Joe Biden, he reached out to Strom Thurmond.
Yes.
And he said, hey, listen, you pull your right wing, I'll make sure I keep the liberals away, okay? And he said, let's try to convince Reagan to appoint a drug czar. And Reagan and if you don't give Reagan too much credit, part of the reason he didn't want to do it is because rhetorically he was already doing the war on drug stuff. He just didn't want to back it up with money because he wanted to give most of the money to the rich, so he didn't want to spend money on prisons, etc. Now, at the end of the day, I'm glad he didn't spend money on prisons. I'm glad he didn't do a drug czar but of course wound up doing it at the very end. But Biden was to the right of him, no question. In fact, here, there's a lot
Put some
of
captions for the people who are deaf.
you one here that really struck me. At the time, Biden said, as most old-line Democrats view it, the only ways we can deal with violence will have a negative impact on civil rights and liberties. I think that's malarkey. So he's saying, I don't care about civil rights. I think that's malarkey. We're just going to do these crime bills. We're going to put everybody in prison. And I don't care about civil rights and liberties.
He was the initial critic of social justice warriors.
Yeah, in a sense, that's right. And remember, they asked him about some of these comments in the last debate. They didn't even get to these more damaging comments. And when asked, hey, you said you didn't give a damn what happened 300 years ago, meaning slavery, he said, yeah, but you got to play a record player to your kids. And he didn't answer the question, and he went on a rambling, and he said, oh, social workers have to come and teach you how to deal with your kids. That is not a good answer. So I'm almost depressed to see Biden's true record. I'm obviously not in his camp in this race, but
Yeah, he did that. Don't do it, Joe Biden. Resets his campaign. Now he's for marijuana legalization. Cory Booker exposed his ass. Jorge challenges him. Here.
There's a great deal of speculation about whether former Vice President Joe Biden will announce his candidacy for the 2020 general election. Now, considering
This was
Biden's
back
recent
then.
actions, which includes
Look.
speaking to potential donors, it's pretty clear to me that he's likely to announce his intent to run soon. Last week on No Filter, we went through the history of Bernie Sanders and his political career to see whether he's been sincere or consistent on the issues that matter the most to Americans.
I will criticize
or at
Bernie
least the
Sanders
issues
if
that
I
matter
need
the most
to.
to progressives. Today, I want to examine Biden's political career, which has been a long one. Let's start with the issue of campaign finance reform. The following video is from 1974, when Biden was a relatively new senator out of Delaware.
The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact, whether or not you can run for public office, and it costs a great deal of money to run for the United States Senate, even from a small state like Delaware, you have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something.
Well, I wonder whether you would feel that there's some virtue in forcing candidates to go out and try to raise money. I've heard people, probably people who didn't run for office, say that it's uplifting to go out and try to get money. Do you think that there's something unuplifting about putting a limit to how much you can ask one man to give you?
I think it's the most degrading experience in the world to have to go out and ask for money, because you know that unless you accidentally agree with the position taken by the person or group that has the money, that you run the risk of deciding whether or not you're going to prostitute yourself to give the answer you know they want to hear in order to get funded to run for that office.
All right, some pretty strong words there. Now remember that video was from 1974. 2 years later, the Supreme Court actually loosened campaign finance regulations in Buckley v. Vallejo. Biden didn't have anything to do with that, but how does he feel about campaign finance today? Is he consistent on this issue? Well, recently The Hill published an article titled Biden Seeks Donors as He Eyes Presidential.
Oh yeah, now
In the
he's doing the
article,
super
those close to
PAC.
Biden say
He's like, I'm
going
not
to
for
get the
super
money
PACs, but now
necessary to
he
start
changed
off
to
with
super
strong
PAC because
funding
of
as
his
soon as he launches his campaign.
slow funding,
A Biden
bad funding.
ally told The Hill, quote, "It's a priority. If you don't have a good second quarter showing, that could be problematic." During his calls with donors or potential donors, Biden mentions that he was the only surrogate who could campaign in both blue and red states. And look, each candidate should campaign in blue and red states, regardless of which party they represent. But I get the sense that Biden work with Republicans in bipartisan compromises, which was a mistake that Obama made again and again and again. I'm not the only one who wants to see a Democratic fighter rather than someone who just wants to compromise for a party that, or compromise with a party, I should say, that has no interest in bending their views. Biden recently got a lot of heat from the left, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, for making it seem like Vice President Mike Pence isn't the anti-freedom, right-wing religious zealot that he really is.
Guy's a decent guy. Our vice president, who stood before this group of allies and leaders and said, I'm here on behalf of President Trump. There was dead silence.
Maybe there was dead silence because the world doesn't see Mike Pence as a decent guy. But okay, look, I know this is a giant tangent and we should get back to money in politics. Bernie Sanders has raised a lot of money from small dollar donors rather than millionaires and billionaires. And maybe Biden was doing the same when he reached out to donors. Maybe he was reaching out to small dollar donors. Except he wasn't.
Let's get to the record on his racism.
Not poverty wages. We can do all this and much more. The next president of the United States has a phenomenal opportunity to make a
from Professor Anita Hill. Much like the Kavanaugh hearings, Hill was asked to Biden's campaigns. Is he willing to do that? Let's hear from Biden in May of 2018 to find out.
We have to deal with income inequity. I love Bernie, but I'm not Bernie Sanders. I don't think 500 billionaires are the reason why we're in trouble.
If a politician claims they want to do something about income inequality in America, they can't simultaneously pretend as if the top 1%, which exploits legalized bribery to ensure politicians keep their taxes low, aren't the problem. Come on. Finally, I wanted to briefly cover an issue that could be a problem for Biden as the primaries heat up. When Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was nominated in the 1990s, he faced sexual harassment allegations from Professor Anita Hill. Much like the Kavanaugh hearings, Hill was asked to testify before the Senate, where Biden, along with a panel of all-male senators, asked her a number of uncomfortable questions.
It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the...
Yeah, let's look for his record on black people. So his race question was horrible. He said, when it came to him basically saying, basically like saying that who cares about the 300 years in slavery and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, kids should just go back to playing the record players and stuff like that. What the hell does that have to do? Okay, let's look for Joe Biden's record when it comes to marijuana legalization. Because marijuana legalization is very good for the black community, because there will be less blacks and minorities in jail if we had it legalized, and we can get all the blacks that are arrested out of jail, and that's good.
if you are arrested and you are a drug dealer, under our forfeiture statute, the government can, take everything you own. Everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you just got caught engaging in. You can take everything.
That's Joe Biden in 1991 bragging about how he helped make it so the government can take everything you own if you're a drug dealer, as if this is a good thing. As if dealing drugs isn't a result of a lack of economic opportunity, often for marginalized groups in society, and as if drug addiction isn't a symptom of despair as opposed to an immoral crime in itself, and as Drug Kingpin Death Penalty Act, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to jail.
This is a part of a disturbing pattern of behavior in his record when it comes to drugs. In the late 80s, he pushed for the establishment of a cabinet position on drug enforcement, also known as a drug czar. This led to the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. Also in the 80s, he co-sponsored the resolution that established the 100-to-1 crack to cocaine ratio, making 100 grams of powdered coke equivalent to 1 gram of crack under the law, which drastically increased racial disparities in prisons. He introduced the National Drug Control Strategy Act of 1990, which would establish, quote, military-style boot camp prisons as an alternate sentencing option for people convicted of drug-related offenses. Seriously, the bill would have also authorized appropriations under the Arms Export Control Act and the Foreign Assistance Act to be used to train and assist military and law enforcement in their anti-drug production and trafficking operations. A separate provision would have encouraged the Central Intelligence Agency to enhance human intelligence that could be used to combat international drug trafficking. Basically, it was a blank check to law enforcement to crack down on drug use. Thankfully, it didn't pass, but his 1994 crime bill did, and is now widely known as a deeply racist bill that has filled our prisons to the brink and is one of America's biggest forces behind mass incarceration. And it was filled with similarly blank check provisions, expanding the drug code to make drug-related murders fall under the death penalty, allowing the president to declare drug emergency areas and give them unilateral authority to vaguely take action in said areas, requiring courts to send the FBI information about what juveniles were convicted of with their drug crimes. Juveniles. And he hasn't backed down from his stance on this issue. He's openly proud of his role. As recently as 2015, Mr. Biden referred to the legislation as the 1994 Biden crime bill. So did he come to a different conclusion on marijuana after seeing all the health uses, the fact that states have gotten buckets of cash from taxing and legalizing, or the fact that 2 in 3 Americans support legalization? What do you think? In 1998, when states started legalizing medical marijuana, he introduced a resolution to stop it with Republican Chuck Grassley, who surprisingly is no fan of grass. His position has not really changed since then. I still believe it's a gateway drug. I've spent a lot of my life as chairman of the Judiciary Committee dealing with this. I think it would be a mistake to legalize, Joe Biden said in 2011. Asked again in 2014, he flatly said no when asked if he supports legalization. His position seems to have softened a bit, but he has not said that he supports legalization. And given his history, why would you ever believe that he would? When a candidate is wrong on an issue since the 1970s and still refuses to apologize for the devastating ramifications of those actions today, why choose Biden? Even if he's now warmed to the idea of marijuana legalization, he will certainly not make it a priority at the very least. So I'll say this again. We have a lot of other choices.
There is that. Let's talk about him on the bankruptcy bill. Let's look. And also, one thing, since Obama was elected, he was like the first black president, but he didn't pass as much legislation, didn't help out his own community at all. He didn't help his community when it comes to legislation. He didn't decrease less police brutality when it came to black people. 2014, when he was president, Eric Gardner died. The mayor did nothing. Basically the district attorney is not pressing charges on him. And there's still like 900 something cases of police brutality cases. The Washington Post puts it up there. Next, The Los Angeles Times reported that 1,000 black men get killed per day. Yeah, let me look for a bill.
I'm gonna get set up downstairs to do that video.
Here it is. Even Warren criticized him. He also says he was going to pick a, what was it? Pick a Republican nominee, or vice president. What? A Republican? And you're supposed to be a Democrat trying to defeat Trump.
Give me a break. No. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break.
Those are some excellent Republican talking points, Joe Biden. Good strategy telling the largest and most energetic faction of the party that you have no empathy for them. If you didn't hear, Joe Biden announced that he is officially running for president today. Shocker. But one quote really caught my eye, and it sums up one of Biden's largest problems, his hubris. I get calls from people all over the world. World leaders are calling me, and they're almost begging me to do this, to save the country, save the world, Biden said. No, that's not Donald Trump speaking. That's former U.S. Senator and former Vice President Joe Biden saying that he is going to save the world with his candidacy. Yes, Joe Biden. Can you imagine Bernie Sanders saying something like that? No, his message has always been, it's us, it's the movement, it's the ideas. And the theme of Biden's arrogance continues.
I get criticized. I'm told I get criticized by the new left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the United States. Anybody who would run.
Really, Joe, you're really going to contend that you're the most progressive person in the race, because you know that Google exists, right? Or maybe he doesn't. I've laid this out before, and maybe Biden needs a reminder. Biden was personally involved in almost every bad policy decision of the last 40 years. He pushed the party away from civil rights, starting his career with George Wallace-style duplicitous fear-mongering about school integration. Yes, Biden was against integration in the 70s. The most progressive person in the race, he says. Biden voted for repeated rounds of deregulation in multiple areas and helped roll back antitrust policy, often siding with Republicans in the process. He was a key architect of the infamous 2005 bankruptcy reform bill, which made means tests much more strict and near impossible to discharge student loans in bankruptcy. He also voted for the most idiotic foreign policy blunder in American history, namely the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Biden's history of siding with Republicans was also evident in his campaign announcement, too. The first minute of his 2020 announcement talks about the events of Charlottesville, Virginia, and Trump saying that there were good people on both sides after the Nazi rally. He then adds,
I believe history will look back on 4 years of this president and all he embraces as an aberrant moment in time.
So remember, this is from the guy who was anti-integration in the 70s. This is from the guy who authored the deeply racist 1994 crime bill. This is the guy who sided with Republicans over and over. That's why he thinks Trump is an aberrant moment in time. He doesn't understand racism or progressivism. He doesn't understand that Trump is the Frankenstein of the Republican Party. His racism and his cruelty are the manifestation of the politics they have played for decades and decades. He's no aberration. He's a culmination. And Biden's fundamental misunderstanding of this is why, if it's Trump versus Biden in 2020, Trump will win. You have to understand your enemy to defeat them. Plus the fact that Biden just doesn't have any policy positions except that he's Obama 2.0. And because he's too arrogant to actually look at the Democratic base and ask what they want.
Hmm? You, didn't you hear? Didn't you hear about his deeply racist crime bill? For real. Joe Biden backs bills that keep students in loan debt. Top class action. American lawyer.
Joe Biden is trying to appeal to younger voters as he's expected to launch his bid for the presidency really
He
any
also
day
has
now.
a stance on.
But as a senator from Delaware, a corporate tax haven where the financial industry is one of the state's largest employers, Biden was one of the key proponents of the 2005 legislation that's now bearing down on student loan debt, which prevents the $150 billion worth of private student loan debt from being discharged, rescheduled, or renegotiated as other debt
Now a trillion.
bankruptcy courts. Steve Malzberg joins us from New York now for this story. Steve, many young voters, they don't even realize that Joe Biden played a key role in the financial industry's four-decade campaign to eliminate bankruptcy protections for student debtors. So how do these students, how do we get this word out, basically, that Biden helped create the current crisis that this country's facing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, believe me, if he gets into the presidential race officially, they will make it known. Elizabeth Warren has already started doing that. And you're right, 4 decades. In the early 70s, there were reports of students immediately declaring bankruptcy right after graduation. But then the GAO did a study in 77 and showed that really it was less than 1% of student loans that were being erased through bankruptcy. So in 78, a bill was proposed to block students from gaining bankruptcy protections for a certain amount of time, and that wiped out an 80-year-old laws, I guess. And Biden was one of the 3 senators who wrote the bill, and a 5-year exemption on government-sponsored loans from bankruptcy protections. Then it expanded in 84 to include vocational schools. Again, it was Biden. And then the 1990 Crime Control Act further increasing the waiting time for traditional bankruptcy protection. And guess who it was? The chief sponsor of that bill, Joe Biden. And then 97, you had a presidential panel recommending a reversal of all this, but Congress went the other way, and Biden was instrumental in that. So the word will get out, believe me.
So, okay, about 20 years ago, with Biden's support, Congress passed a law limiting bankruptcy protections for educational loans to students who could prove their loans were an undue hardship. So, Steve, a court ruling illustrated just how difficult a legal barrier the standard was designed to be, even for the most cash-strapped debtors, right?
Yeah, you're talking about 1998. Biden supported that law, and in the court case that you're referring to here, there was a disabled woman, 45 years old. Her only income was Social Security, $10,000 a year. A Clinton-appointed judge who, and I say that because, by the way, to get confirmed, had to go through Biden's Judiciary Committee, so he's involved in that too. The judge ruled that this woman did not meet the standard of undue hardship for discharging her student loans, even though she showed undue hardship and certainty of hopelessness, by the way, another standard. You would think that in her situation she met both criteria. So that court case says it all, how difficult it was, even with that law, to get it done.
So, and honestly, like, the story just gets even worse, because Biden helped roll back countless antitrust policies, siding a lot of times with Republicans in this process. So,
Yeah. So, let's get to this. He was against integration. Integration in the 70s. Oh, everybody go like, oh, he was just young. He was just young and ignorant back then. He was just dumb and ignorant. No. He was basically at the age where he basically now wants to run for president, but he acts like nobody's gonna learn his big record of doing horrible things. For real. He basically helped Obama. What was it? Make the Bush tax cuts permanent when it came to rich people. He's the one who basically sided with Republicans, gave them more, and gave the Democrats less. He is the one who worked with Strom Thurmond, legendary segregationists, to basically put this crime bill that hurts minorities. Killer Mike even says how legalizing marijuana will help the black community on the Al Sharpton show, but was never posted on MSNBC's YouTube channel. The only way you're going to find that clip is from Progressive Voice. Type in Progressive Voice Killer Mike. So, do you guys understand where I'm coming from? Yes or no? Share this video with your friends, family, everywhere. Basically, give your thoughts about this. Share this video all around. Because this cannot stand. Thank you. Bye. And Joe Biden's losing in the primaries. He's going to lose Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada to, guess who? Bernie. And Biden got exposed by Bernie when it came to his record on, guess what? Billionaire donors. 44 billionaire donors. Corruption. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. I hope you